Okie bloopers, Niitaniko cut jaw, and welcome back to my channel. Now, I have a hypothetical scenario for you all. I'm a melanated Native American woman, but let's say I married and procreated with an Arab man. Then let's say our child procreated with an Irish person. And let's say their child procreated with an African. And that African reproduced with another African. Could that person say they're Native American? No, right? I think most normal, logical people would agree that technically that person would be African because they have one parent who is half Irish, half African, and another parent who's a full African. A relative has to be immediate in order for you to claim them. If I have an Asian in my family tree from over 200 years ago, I don't have a right to go around self-identifying myself as Asian. Having one person from a particular ethnic group from over a century ago doesn't make you a member of that ethnic group. If you haven't watched my previous video discussing how race fetishes and an after effect of white guilt have adversely impacted both the indigenous and African communities as well as descendants from these groups, I suggest you do so first before watching this video because the two are interconnected. In fact, this video is the second of a three-part video series where I focus predominantly on how self-hate, anti-Blackness, and severe Stockholm Syndrome will be the decline of the Native diaspora unless we acknowledge this as a major problem and do something about it. As I've also stated in my previous video, if you're someone who's very sensitive to the concept of someone not supporting interracial relationships between ethnic people and Caucasians, I suggest you save yourself the emotional distress and just click off this video right now. I have no intention to infantilize anyone about this topic. I know today's video is going to get a lot of people upset, but this is something that definitely needs to be discussed regardless of how uncomfortable it may make some people. And today's topic is ethnic cleansing. But before this topic is discussed further, I would like to invite you to become a bluebird if you aren't one already. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on my social media, including Twitter and Instagram. If you would like to support this channel, you may do so by becoming a patron through Patreon, where you can subscribe to a monthly membership for as low as $2 per month, or give a one-time donation in any amount. If you do choose to become a patron, you'll receive access to exclusive content, including posts, excerpts from my novels, poetry, early videos, exclusive videos, and so on and so forth. There's even a chat room where you can speak with me directly. Now, what I like to do before I go deeply into a discussion is define the term in question. I believe this is important because so many people in today's society seem to lack a real sense of understanding for the words they use. The definition of ethnic cleansing, according to Merriam-Webster, is, quote, the expulsion, imprisonment, or killing of an ethnic minority by a dominant majority in order to achieve ethnic homogeneity, end quote. And of course, I don't completely agree with this definition, but the one thing that should be taken from it is that ethnic cleansing is always exercised by a dominant group against a minority group, and that it is, in fact, a terrible occurrence. The essential definition of ethnic cleansing, which I will be referencing throughout this video, is when a particular ethnic group is eliminated and or replaced by members of the dominant society. This can happen in one of two ways: physical ethnic cleansing and biological ethnic cleansing. Now, before we get into the two forms of ethnic cleansing, I believe it's viable to take note as to how members of the dominant society literally completely ignore the devastating impact of ethnic cleansing. In fact, most Caucasians refuse to acknowledge how their people have benefited from the ethnic cleansing of indigenous people. Genocide and colonization alone aren't the only factors that help Caucasians gain control of this land, but also ethnic cleansing. Firstly, what am I even talking about when I say ethnic cleansing, and how exactly is it destructive to the indigenous population? Well, let me start off by saying this, and I will literally scream this from the rooftops for as long or as much as I possibly can. Native Americans were melanated. Let me say that again. Native Americans were melanated. When Europeans first arrived in North America, many tribes referred to white men as the pale-skinned man. If Native Americans were also pale-skinned, why would they even say this? Because there wouldn't be a reason to point out someone who looks like you. You don't ever see an Asian with monolids being surprised by seeing another Asian with monolids. So if Native Americans were always pale themselves, there wouldn't be any logic in pointing this out. So please, please, please stop believing in and promoting these demonic lies being put forth by demonic Caucasians and those who side with their faulty rhetoric. Native Americans were not a random mix between Asian and European, like how Caucasians want us to believe. Native Americans did not travel over an ice bridge thousands of years ago from Asia. And despite how Caucasians have classified 3 races only, thusly omitting indigenous people from being of a real race of their own, I've always believed that indigenous should also be considered a race, but I'll talk more about the race classification in another video. But back to the topic at hand, ethnic cleansing is a real modern-day problem within the Native community. Obviously, if every generation marries outside their own ethnicity, they'll eventually wash that original ethnicity out of existence. So Native Americans constantly marrying and procreating with anyone besides other Native Americans will only hurt our community in the long run, especially since our population is so much notably smaller than that of other ethnic groups. This is common sense. You don't need to be a professor of genetics in order to understand that. So, the first type of ethnic cleansing is physical, and this is where genocide comes into play. Killing off hundreds of thousands of indigenous people through combat warfare, biological warfare, population control, including but not limited to intentionally contaminating land and water with chemicals that cause reproductive harm, forced assimilation, and government relocation are all forms of physical ethnic cleansing. The next and far more confusing type of ethnic cleansing is biological ethnic cleansing or intentional ethnic cleansing. This is when indigenous people conscientiously seek out the same people who are killing us off for romantic partnerships. I didn't realize anti-melanin attitudes existed in the Native community, but unfortunately they do. This is indicative in the sheer magnitude of Native Caucasian relationships I see. A lot of these people, too, aren't actually Native American, but are simply riding on the indigenous boat because they think it's fun or cool or sexy. Because once again, Native people are still very much fetishized by members of the dominant society. But regardless of whether or not they are truly Native to begin with, these people usually insert themselves in the Native community so that it's completely impossible to ignore or overlook them. So this issue has to be addressed regardless of how truly Native these people are. Generally speaking, I believe that a lot of interracial marriages spring forth from the newest ridiculous notion that if you're not interested in dating or marrying, but especially marrying, someone outside your specific ethnic group, then you're some closed-minded, vicious white supremacist. Actually, before globalization, in which people of different nationalities and cultures were forced to coexist in the same place, everyone married and procreated within their own ethnic group. Historically, interracial marriage was always very rare, and it was actually illegal in the United States until fairly recently. Before colonization and immigration caused different people to get mixed into each other's spaces and identities, the overwhelming majority of people operated and lived within their own group and community. I believe what's really important to remember is that it is in fact possible to appreciate or enjoy aspects of another culture without actively completely blending into that culture through marriage or procreation. And it's also possible to be attracted to someone from another ethnic group but still be with a member of your own ethnic group. Now, I will admit that I've been attracted to men of other races, but I would politely and respectfully turn them down. Not because I think they're ugly, not necessarily because I have deep-seated hatred for them, not because I have a hang-up against their home country, not because I believe that Native Americans are somehow genetically superior to everyone else, but because I want my mate to belong to my same ethnic and cultural group. I want a mate who already understands the indigenous struggle. I want my children to come from 2 people who share the same culture and identity and who can instill a firm foundation of self-worth to them. And I also want my children to have the same cultural connection and ethnicity as myself. And I don't think it makes me a neo-Nazi or a vengeful, hateful person just because I believe in ethnic solidarity when my people make up less than 2% of the global population. When it comes to people with zero Native American blood claiming that they're indigenous, a lot of this comes from another faulty belief that surely came from the Caucasian community. And that would be the belief that you can somehow not have even a drop of Native American blood, but still claim yourself as a Native as long as you attend a few powwows and know how to say a few words in a tribal dialect. But this is wrong. What this does is make the Native American community rot itself from the inside out and become some kind of social club instead of an actual ethnic group with a distinctive culture. Being Native American isn't some fun extracurricular high school club anyone can come off the street and join just because they want to. We are a real ethnicity with real life problems and real challenges. I cannot just sit back silently as random imposters whose blood has no real connection to this land, swoop in and claim our culture and the land that culture was practiced on. That's wrong, and if you think that's right, you must be some kind of Satanist. This is also one of many reasons why so many Native Americans still aren't being respected enough to be included in mainstream society, mainstream media, etc. I mean, if I was Caucasian and I found out that at least 30% of North American natives were procreating with my people before we even gave them their land back, I wouldn't respect them either. But I'll talk more about that in my video where I address my disappointing discoveries about the Native American community. What more people need to understand is that it is in fact possible to appreciate a culture without merging your entire existence with an individual from that culture. You can respect someone's culture and customs without necessarily having to marry them to prove it. So why would any Native American willingly want to be in a serious romantic relationship with a Caucasian? As already mentioned, colorism, self-hate, and or perceived social gain. Let's look at each a bit closer. Colorism. When we say colorism in today's world, we're essentially referencing a strong dislike of melanin. Melanin is a protein produced in the skin that causes pigmentation. Melanin has many benefits, such as the decreased likelihood of getting skin cancer, as well as more elasticity, causing you to look younger than you actually are. The more pigmented your skin is, the more melanin you have. Different groups of people have different amounts of melanin. Some people have an extremely small amount, others are born with a moderate amount of melanin, and then there are those who are heavily melanated. Due to white supremacy in the aftermath of global colonization, melanin became something associated with being dirty, hypersexual, and unintelligent. And no, I'm not going to talk about colorism in the Asian community because this video is specifically about the relationship between Caucasians and natives, and unlike Europeans, Asians never stole our land or exercised genocide and assimilation on us for centuries. Asian people just haven't treated us nearly as poorly as Caucasians have, so I don't want to see any comments talking about, but in Korea they treat black people like this, or in Malaysia they think this about melanin, because we're not talking about that right now. Ultimately, some natives are prioritizing pale skin and are intentionally seeking out Caucasians specifically for the purpose of self-ethnic cleansing. There are natives, and it really breaks my heart and embarrasses me to even say this, but there are natives who want Eurocentric features, pale skin, white privilege, all while also maintaining shifty ties with the native identity. I'm sorry, but it doesn't and shouldn't work that way. Either you're going to be white or native, pick one. And I know that I mentioned pale-skinned black men earlier in my fetishism video, which infers how I understand that ethnic people can still have pale complexions, but I talk about pale-skinned natives differently. And the reason for this is because the overwhelming majority of black people are still melanated. In fact, it's rare to find a pale-skinned black person outside of the ones who bleach their skin, that is. But it's the total opposite for Native Americans. The overwhelming majority of our community is composed of pale-skinned folks, whereas it's rare to find a melanated native such as myself. Black people still have a higher level of racial solidarity compared to Native Americans. Of course, they also have a larger population than Native Americans. See, it's not as easy for Caucasians to replace black people because there are far more of them. Then there are, believe it or not, a lot of black people who stay on code and only date, marry, and procreate with other black people. There are black people who conscientiously only reside in communities with other black people. And also, there really aren't as many benefits for Caucasians to ethnically cleanse the black race as it is for them to do that to Native Americans. They're still doing it, though. And compared to the black community, most Native Americans seem to be a bit too lax when it comes to how we interact with them. Why are there Caucasians living on reservations? Why are Caucasians participating in the powwow? It's bad enough for them to even be there, but to actually don our sacred attire and do our sacred dance? So, Native Americans, all things considered, are making it fairly easy for Caucasians to be involved in our community and to also breed us out of existence. Now, sellouts obviously exist in every ethnic group, and as I've mentioned already, as I sadly discovered, also in the indigenous community as well. But what makes the existence of indigenous sellouts such a travesty is that there are less of us than those of other ethnic groups. If Caucasian-looking natives were rare, I wouldn't even be talking about this right now. This wouldn't even be a discussion. But the fact that almost every time a Native American is shown in the media or any public sphere, actually, they are paler than white people and have European mindsets and features really bothers me, because our ancestors did not look like that. Our ancestors did not think like that. Our ancestors did not act like that. Our ancestors were melanated with big noses and broad cheekbones for the most part. In other words, they looked like ethnic people. There are a lot of natives, those with self-hate, who despise their ethnic features and want to get rid of them. I've both seen and heard instances of natives online who said they didn't like their skin color or hair type, and I was deeply disturbed because I have personally never felt that way about my beautiful brown skin. And please stop it with the idea that you should be proud of being half Caucasian. I'm tired of people saying, embrace being mixed. Tell us about how great it is to be mixed. Cut it out, seriously. There shouldn't be any pride with being half colonizer. If anything, these people should ignore being half white. And if they do mention it, they should admit that it was a mistake on their native parents' part, that they won't repeat the same mistake, and that they'll identify chiefly as native. Ethnic cleansing ain't cute. The thing is, self-hate, wanting to wish every ethnic feature away that your people from your own ethnic group have had since the dawn of time, should be considered a mental illness. Now, I don't support psychology, but I do believe it's abnormal to hate yourself. Just like how being suicidal is considered proof that a person's mental state isn't right, it should also be considered proof that a person's mental state is off when they are born with brown skin, yet somehow hate brown skin. And I already mentioned in my fetishism video how being with Caucasians for a social come-up is a myth, so I won't be too repetitive about that. The simple fact that Native people are exercising biological ethnic cleansing on their own people indicates that something seriously wrong is going on in the Native community. And although some Black people are doing this too, it must be remembered that Black people outnumber us and that most of them are still melanated. Regardless of that, the Black community is suffering in many ways because of this habit of marrying out of their race. And Native Americans are struggling too. Spirits are also important to take into consideration. When you mate with someone, they take a small part of your spirit and vice versa. Caucasians don't have good spirits, and I'm not just saying this because of genocide or colonization. Even in my own personal life, Caucasians have radiated an inexplicable coldness, and if you're truly in tune with your spiritual side, or if any legitimate level of self-awareness, you'll be able to sense this too. Just look at how they act. They still clearly don't care about moral repercussions of their actions. Please watch my video about my cousin Jesse Washington to get a glimpse of some of the trauma Caucasians have unnecessarily inflicted on my bloodline. Even Caucasians who aren't racist still give off strange energy. And Native Americans allowing bad spirits into our families and sacred spaces is indeed bizarre, and it is in fact a problem. My great-grandmother and her siblings, all of whom were natives, were taken from their mother after she was murdered by a Mexican man. They live in a city where many Mexicans lived, and after they were taken from their tribal land, the authorities, Caucasian of course, took some of the Mexicans and brought them to the reservation. So when I say that most of the so-called natives on reservations are Mexican and Caucasian, I really mean it. I'm not just using a figure of speech. For centuries, Caucasians have been making great persistent efforts to wipe out all humans on Earth. They did it to the Jews, who were originally melanated, to the Middle Easterners, who are also becoming increasingly pale, and they're trying to do it to the Native American community, but it won't work. My family and my clan has gone through far too much for me to just sit here silently and not speak out against it, because it's wrong. And from sterilization to human experimentation to dragging us off our tribal grounds and severing our connection with our tribe and culture, to the lynching of my cousin Jesse Washington, to countless other things, my family and I have suffered gravely due to Caucasians and those who side with them. And if you are a Native American who sides with Caucasians, I'm holding you just as responsible for the pain that has been inflicted upon my clan. And why are people taking DNA tests from Caucasians when they have been known to lie? Have my people forgotten how Caucasians are still taking desperate measures to eliminate us? They could be telling you one thing when something else is actually the truth. Sure, some people actually are not Native, of course, but for those of us who are 85 to 95% Native, do you really think they're going to give us those results? Highly unlikely. Probably not. You can listen to their music, watch their movies, or even speak their languages, but you shouldn't dare allow yourself to fall for the false rhetoric that making mixed-race babies is a solution to white supremacy, because it is not. Native people need to prioritize solidarity right now. Our community and people lack a sense of togetherness, and this disconnect won't help us fight white supremacy or even stay afloat socially. But I'm not going to go on and on about this forever because I believe my point has been established by now. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below, but please do understand that I won't be tolerating any dilution in my comment section. And if you find any Indigenous person stating the opposite of what has been stated in this video, if I find any Indigenous person stating the opposite of what has been stated in this video, the comment may be subject to deletion. Because if you think ethnic cleansing is okay, you don't have a spirit of our ancestors, and you are an enemy who needs to be ousted from our community. But with that being said, I'm cut, y'all. This is the Bone Thread, and I'll see you all in the next video.